Hello, this is Karan from San Francisco.
And this is Alex from Boston, and welcome to Movies That Shaped Us, a journey of self-discovery through a shared love of film. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite sides of the globe with very different backgrounds, but we're both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies. We hope these movies and topics are fun and revelatory to you, just like they've been to us. So just one note, show note, astute listeners might have noticed I did not say Los Angeles in the intro. I'm actually, it's around the holiday time, so I'm back on the East Coast just with family. Hopefully no one got thrown off. I'm the same Alex, I'm just in a different city. So Karan, why don't you let our listeners know what we'll be discussing today?
All right. So today we're talking about movies that shaped our love of film, part 2. So if listeners remember, we did a similar episode on just our love of film at the beginning of this year, or even last year, really. When was it, Alex?
Oh, shoot. I should have wrote that down. It was one of our early episodes, maybe like in the first 5 or 6. We
probably, yeah.
Yeah.
But we sort of felt that, it's the end of the year. This is also when all the, big awards movies and sort of film festival movies are pretty much everything is out at this point. So it felt like a natural time to kind of revisit why we love film and really why we love doing this podcast, but also share with our listeners kind of our journey of, development of love with film as it's gone over our lifespan. So just to kind of get into it, in the first episode that we did on love of film, for me, it was very much about the movies that made me a cinephile. So movies that made me think deeper about film and such, versus I think this episode today is the next step in that journey. That once I started to think about film more deeply, what were films that challenged me and sort of really helped push my envelope, really, in terms of how I view film. I don't think I would have appreciated or even finished some of the movies that I have on my list had I watched them before the first set of movies that got me, thinking about film in a deep way in the first place. So that's sort of really kind of my framework. Just to give people a sense of what were our movies, or at least my movies in the first round, I had Notorious, A Place in the Sun, Brief Encounter. Nice. I can't wait to share the next batch. How about you, Alex?
Yeah. So I'm definitely excited to hear or to discuss your next 3 as well. So for me, just to recap, listeners, I had the 3 films that I had included in my list before were 2001, Space Odyssey. This is sort of my realization that film could be art. Citizen Kane, which really got me into studying how films get made and production history, things like that. And then The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which was a kind of a B pulp Western that realized to me, like, okay, well, something doesn't have to be high art to be art, and that popular films could also be art. Like in my approach to this, much like you were saying, Karan, too, like previously, I those were 3 films that I just mentioned were definitely films that like got me into like the art of film and loving movies are something I want to obsess over. So they were kind of, to make an analogy, I guess, they were like the seed that got planted, those 3 films. And then as the tree started growing, there were specific films that helped me kind of branch off into deeper exploration to different parts of film and film history, the art of film, things like that. That these 3 films that I'm going to talk about today each are a different branch. That after this film, it pushed me in this other direction for a while, and I delved into certain films and genres and things like that. So I'm definitely excited to talk about these 3 films and share those journeys with you and our listeners.
Wow, I'm loving this tree and branch metaphor.
I just came up with it on the top of my head. Yeah. Maybe I should have put Tree of Life on my list to signify that analogy a little bit more. But that's sort of how I viewed this. These are my branches.
That resonates a lot with me too, actually. That's a good way to put it. All right, so with that, do you want to share your number 3?
Sure, I'll kick it off. So my number 3 film on this episode that shaped my love of film is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari from 1920, which I think is probably then the oldest movie we've talked about so far in the podcast. Directed by Robert Wien, starring Conrad Veidt and Werner Krauss. The IMDb plot summary: hypnotist Dr. Caligari uses I actually can't pronounce this word, so I'm just going to call it sleepwalker. It's a word I've never been able to pronounce. Can you pronounce this? or actually, you can't see what I'm looking at. So,
I can't see
it's like
anything.
it means basically a sleepwalker. Uh,
Insomniac?
no, it's some other
No.
word, somnambulist
Oh.
or something. I don't know. I can't pronounce it. So, hypnotist
Oh.
Dr. Caligari uses a sleepwalker, Caesar, to commit murders. So that's my version of the plot summary. So I chose this because for me, this was like my introduction to silent films.
Mm.
So I stumbled across this movie as a late high school, in my late, and when I was in high school on AMC, like back when they used to show movies before, like, their TV shows and
Mhm.
zombies and stuff. They'd show movies, and late at night, like really late, like 1, 2 in the morning, they'd put silent films on there. And I remember being up late one night and just kind of flipping through the channels, and like I was like, "What is this?" I just had never seen anything like this before. So this film is a German expressionist film. So it's very much like, there's sets that are painted in these crazy angles. It's not supposed to look realistic. It's supposed to look expressionistic. And I, as mentioned on the podcast a couple times in the past, have covered some Tim Burton movies, and he was one of my favorite directors growing up as a kid. And he had a very distinct visual style that I immediately was like, whoa, this looks like Tim Burton. Like, oh, maybe this is something that inspired him. So I watched the film, and then I just was enthralled with it. I thought visually it was incredibly interesting. The story's kind of cool too. There's pretty strong plot. There's a little plot twist involved in it. It's got some horror elements, which is also a genre that I really like. And I was just like, wow, like this film just kind of blew me away. I mean, at this point, it was less than 100 years old, but still, I was like,
Mhm.
wow, like back then, like silent films can be this interesting, like visually, and could pull me into the story, even though obviously they're not recording sound. There's just like the score. So it's what kind of pulled me into not only first German expressionist films. So after seeing this, I watched, like Nosferatu and Metropolis and M, and I was like trying to then seek out these films at the
Mhm.
library, because I was like, what is this? I always wrote off silent films before I saw this one. So yeah, like for me, I think again, silent films, German expressionism, but then beyond that, just silent films in general. Like I would look for Intolerance and Birth of a Nation, and Charlie Chaplin films, and all these films that I just never thought I would enjoy. Or I don't want to say I wrote them off, but it wasn't really a focus of mine, especially as a high school student. I was like, I love Kubrick and Spielberg. And once I started
Mhm.
really getting into films, I never would have thought this would be an area of interest, but it totally became one. And even rewatching the film now, it was funny. Like I watched it for the podcast, and then immediately watched a couple other silent films, and found this documentary on YouTube that the BBC made in 1980, all about the history of early Hollywood, and going back and learning how, the film industry came about. There's so much history packed into these old movies. So I'm kind of back on this branch again, to use the branch analogy, like going down the silent film branch kind of a second time. But yeah, like I also want to say, this film is great. Like it still holds up to me. Not only is the visual style really cool, but now, as someone who's a lot older than I was in high school, I can also see sort of what the film was trying to say about, this is post World War I Germany. And you can read into it as that sleepwalker is the young generation who is like, because Dr. Caligari kind of controls this sleepwalker in the film to go out and commit murders, much like you can say the German aristocracy. And I don't want to pick on the Germans, but everyone at that time, the upper class, the
Mhm.
ruling class, was leading all of these younger folks to go to war in World War One, and it was
Mhm.
a horrible experience for everyone involved. And I think this film, deals a lot with that, in terms of, okay, well, you blame the ruling class, or how is this, what are the impact of these sort of silently kind of following orders and just being a sleepwalker and going into these things can do. So not only the visuals now that I appreciate, but now I'm starting to see some things in the story too. So yeah,
Mhm.
fantastic film. I think it's an easy film to get into for silent film, just because it is so visually stunning, or just interesting. I'll use that word. So if people out there have never seen a silent movie or thought they were kind of boring, so you can get it on YouTube. It's in public domain. Just search for it on YouTube, watch a little bit of it, and either you'll get totally pulled in and enthralled like me, or maybe you won't, but at least you've seen a movie that I consider a classic. So that's my silent film exploration started with this movie.
Cool. And good timing with Damien Chazelle's Babylon coming
Yes,
out
you're right.
this
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
I can't wait to see that. And I've been reading all the crazy reactions to that movie. Um, yeah, I struggled with this movie and I took a step back, and I knew probably why you had this on the list. And I
Hmm.
sort of felt that maybe I have not evolved enough in my sort of love of film that I can actually sit down and appreciate a silent film. So I think I have a few more years
Okay.
to
Yeah.
go to fully do that. I have seen silent movies that were more comedic, and I think I found
Ah,
it a
okay.
lot easier to kind of follow them and Charlie Chaplin and such. I think the pacing of this movie, because it's silent, the title cards and everything,
Hmm.
I did struggle with it because it's not a comedy movie. It's not
No.
about
Right.
physical comedy and gags. It's like there's
Hmm.
actual impressionism and themes and plot and all of that. I sort of struggled with that. That said, I can totally see the impressionistic cinema that you were talking about, the angles and the sets and even the performances, the way they
Hmm.
are kind of heightened, but somehow they felt pretty real in a
Hmm.
weird way. I don't know why. There's like a haunting kind of quality to it for
Hmm.
sure,
Hmm.
even if you don't really follow it to the T. So I was very glad that you had it on the list, and hopefully I can come back to it in a few years and make some more mental space for it and really meet it where it's at. I don't
Hmm.
think I'm there at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, I think silent films are hard to kind of get into, especially for like, maybe our listeners or something. They might have again written them off like I had.
Yeah.
And for me, this was the hook in, but for you, I mean, I think maybe it was the comedies. Like I think there's so many different types of films that were around then that can spark your interest. So I think that's why, for me it was something very visual. And again, I could see Tim Burton in this. I mean, this Sleepwalker was like, oh, this is exactly, or not exactly, but
Yeah.
very similar to Johnny Depp and Edward Scissorhands. I'm like, did they get his makeup
True.
from this? Johnny Depp's performance sort of seems a little bit kind of stilted and weird, like the Caesar character in this film. So that was helped me in because I liked those things to begin with. So maybe folks, this might not be the silent film for them. And for you, it might be the comedies and like Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, things
Right.
like that. But I'm glad you watched it and enjoyed it. It's crazy. I mean, especially now, just rewatch it, be like, damn, like this film's over 100 years old. I just
It's
think
pretty
starting to think
amazing.
about that, I was like, whoa, because I hadn't seen this maybe in like 10 years or so. But yeah,
It's
crazy.
pretty amazing. I was just thinking about this when you were talking about the movies that I don't know how many times in a week I find myself saying, oh, they were ahead of their times, to the point that I'm starting to now think about, have we just been in this sort of giant circular motion that
Yeah.
everything was happening to a certain degree at all points in time, and it's all
Hmm.
connected.
Hmm.
We just sort of feel living today, looking back, that, oh, maybe they didn't get it. And maybe some things are true for
Hmm.
sure, where there
Hmm.
is natural evolution and just changes in perspectives. But it seemed like a lot of the seeds of whatever we see in any time frame were sown way back, and they go
Hmm.
away and they come back again. So I don't
Yeah.
know, it's kind of a
Yeah.
good reminder to that, just in watching this movie.
No, that's true. That's a really good point. Yeah. Time can be cyclical and
Yeah,
something that is new might not be new, but it's just new again.
exactly. Have they remade this movie?
There's been a different sort of versions of it where famous musicians have put different scores behind it. And then there
Mm.
was, I believe it was like 2009 or 2010, there was a remake that some folks did using green screens where they were trying to like
Huh.
reproduce the look of the film, but with a modern aesthetic. But I don't know if there's actually been a remake in a kind of traditional sense. But I could be wrong about that. But I think
That
what
would be
makes
cool to see.
yeah, yeah. No, I think would make this story kind of interesting is trying to take it into like a modern times or just
Yeah,
there is the story is very interesting. And I like the twist ending is pretty. Maybe that was unique at the time too, but I always
yeah,
thought that was a surprise when I was watching even back then. So I think you could do something with this, and it is in the
I
public
think so
domain.
too.
So you know maybe a listener can go out there
Exactly.
and make a film version
Yeah.
of this. But cool. So why don't we get to your number three film? What are you talking about today?
All right. So my number three is a movie called Nashville from 1975, directed by Robert Altman, starring Keith Carradine, Lily Tomlin, Karen Black, many other people. Quick logline from IMDb. Over the course of a few hectic days, numerous interrelated people prepare for a political convention. So I put this movie on my list because I think this movie is I wouldn't say introduction, but the first time that I could, in a meaningful way, engage with one of these sort of milieu kind of movies where It's not about the
Mm,
plot. It's not
right.
really about the story. We're going to spend a whole bunch of time. This movie is a long movie. We're going to spend a whole bunch of time in this very specific place with these specific people and just sort of, be part of the environment. And I think it's one of those movies where for the longest time you don't even know what is happening. You kind of just sit with it, and it's only later, once the movie is over, that's when the themes of the movie hit hard and you sort of live with them. That sort of was my experience of watching this movie for the first time. That I thought about this movie for days and days of what it was trying to say about
Mm,
celebrity and hero culture and patriotism, and how everybody is sort of gray, everybody is sort of good, sort of bad, but they're trying to sort of survive and do whatever they can at various, uh, points in their lives and whatever social and societal structure they might belong to. So, but it sort of gets underneath your skin. And I vividly remember this movie because I think before this movie, I had a used to have a hard time, and maybe I still have a hard time with some of the 70s classics because
mm,
I'm very much driven by kind of characters and actors and dialogue, not so much story and plot.
mm-hmm.
And I think pacing of movies does matter to me. And I think there's so many of these great 70s classics like Shampoo and Parallax View and Five Easy Pieces and New Leaf and such, that movies that I couldn't really watch earlier. Like I would watch 20 minutes and I was like, this is just,
Mm,
too all over the place and too
mm.
boring.
Yeah,
And
I couldn't get into
what
it.
is even happening? I couldn't really get into them. And I think Nashville really broke that for me. And
Mm,
and it's no surprise, right? Like Altman is such a master craftsman. Like it's such a genius way of capturing so much that's going on, but yet keep it so specific.
mm-hmm.
And you need to strike that balance of environment and people and characters in such a way that they can then hit you hard once the movie is over. Otherwise, the whole thing will just like fall off like sand,
Mm-hmm.
through your hands. And the movie has that quality because there's so much of ambient things that are happening, conversations and cutovers and multiple overlay themes, and it almost looks like cinema verite. It looks real in some ways, but yet it's super stylized and
Mm-hmm.
kind of grounded. So I don't know. I just find this movie kind of incredible. And not to mention, we talk a lot about getting transported. Like this is again one of those movies. I'd never been to Nashville. I still haven't
Mm-hmm.
been to Nashville. I would really love to go. I think this movie totally transports you to that place and what these people care about, and all of that. So yeah. And I guess last two mentions, Lily Tomlin,
Mm,
incredible
mm-hmm.
star making performance. I mean, I could just talk about her and on an entire episode. What a great kind of path breaking career she's had. And then music, that the main song he sings, I'm Easy. It's
Mm.
it's one of the songs that's been on my playlist since I watched that movie. I listen to it, every now and then. Just so beautiful and also kind of paradoxical because
Mm-hmm.
the lyrics are actually the opposite of what this person actually conveys in this
Yep.
movie,
Yep.
which is so amazing. And really, that's the entire movie. Like, it is sort of saying the things as you see them are not always what they really are. So, yeah, that's my number three, Nashville.
Yeah, this I was not someone who grew up a lot with Altman, or he was not a filmmaker that even now I haven't seen everything that he's done because he has a huge
Me
filmography.
neither.
And I had I think the first movie I probably or definitely saw of his was The Player in college and loved it. Love that
Blair is
movie.
amazing.
And then this movie actually was a one that I'd heard a lot of great stuff about it. But it was very hard to find.
Oh,
It just was not like I don't know. It wasn't something about maybe it wasn't released on DVD with enough like editions or something. I don't know. It was a tricky movie to kind of track down. I was actually kind of curious, like how did you first see this?
I saw it, I want to say in the late 2000s, I
Okay, on
think.
DVD, like you rented it somewhere, or just
Probably.
curious.
Oh
Okay,
yeah, I think this was like a Netflix
Netflix
DVD
DVD. Oh, yeah,
rental.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I had and I always heard about it. Like it was a movie, like, oh, one of the best movies ever, best movies of the 70s. And I just wasn't like, it wasn't as easy. I don't know why. It just wasn't as easily accessible. So I finally did watch it, and I wasn't really in, like, I was going into it being like, I need to watch this, more of like I don't want to say like check it off a list, but okay, it's a
Right.
classic. I should know what this is. And I also walked away from it similar to what you were saying of like, there's so much going on in this movie that you don't really realize it until after it's over. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really about, I mean, it's, we did an episode already over this past year, like plug for our America episode
Mm-hmm.
around 4th of July this year. But I think this is one of the best movies about like
Yeah.
America without ever really hitting anything over the head. It's all there,
Yeah.
but it's not, the central plot has nothing to do with it. It's not in your face about we're going to make this big, statement about what America's like in the 70s, but that's what this
Right.
movie captures, and you don't really realize it till it's over. And I definitely feel this movie captures what you were talking about with like Altman. He doesn't really, it's like it's not really about the characters, like the story or it's like a vibe. Like everything is
It's a
just this
vibe.
vibe that you go into because there's not a central character. They're just so,
No.
and 20 minutes in, it can be like, wait, what's going on? And then when you realize it's not really about trying to follow some plot line where there's going to be some big
There's
revelation
no
about
hero's
something.
arc.
There's
People
no
walk
hero.
in and walk out. You don't see
Exactly.
somebody who you met earlier,
Right.
whereas Jeff Goldblum happens to be in every frame, just in the corner.
With not
It's
saying a
so
thing. He
odd.
has no
That's
lines of
so
dialogue.
cool.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's so cool. It's like the theme is what the movie is about. Like the
Right.
vibe, the theme, what it's trying to say, not all the, what are window dressings in this movie, but for other movies, like, hey, they're about a character arc, like you said, or they're about an event that happened. And yeah, things happen in this movie, and there's amazing characters that, like Lily Tomlin, or just
Mm-hmm.
that, you are like interested in and you want to know more about them, and Ned Beatty too, but it's not really about that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it was great rewatching this movie. It also was, again, hard to track down now. I had to buy it off of YouTube, I think,
Oh,
because it couldn't, like, it's not available to stream. You can't rent it. Which, again, I don't, some rights thing probably with this movie.
probably. Yeah. I bought it on iTunes way back when, so I've always had
Okay,
it
okay.
now for
Yeah.
years. But I know, I mean, Shortcuts, for example, the other Alpine movie, I actually just bought the Blu-ray a few months
Hmm.
ago because that was another movie that was not available anywhere. It would come up over and over again.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. There's something about his movies that are not easily available.
Yeah, it's too bad because he definitely is one of those American masters. Again, I'm not an Altman
Yeah,
expert, and I wouldn't put him in my personal like top 10, but I want to learn more about. Like, I haven't actually seen
right.
Shortcuts yet, for example. Like, I've seen a couple of his early some westerns that he did. But yeah, this film for sure. Like, there's moments that stand out to me a lot. The that really hard scene to watch when that one character is being like forced to strip for the guys because
Mm-hmm.
she can't sing. And the ending of this movie. That's what I actually remember when I first saw this. It, like, everything comes together for me in that whole last scene where there's the big
Totally.
sing or song happening with the big American flag, and then there's like a shooting, and then that one singer who's been trying to break in through the entire movie, like, she gets up there and she's able to finally have her star breaking moment on the back of a horrible tragedy incident, but like the music's helping healing people, like all these things that you read into about America, especially in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
That was, and I remember watching it the first time, be like, whoa, now I get this movie, like, all of a sudden, because I was waiting throughout the whole film to be like, okay, like, it's Altman, like, it's kind of a vibey thing, which isn't usually, as listeners to the podcast will know, like, those are usually not my type of, like, hangout movies are not really my thing necessarily. But this movie transcends that. And I love this film. I think it is a masterwork for sure. And it's worth the headache to track it down for those who have not seen
And
it.
the
Like, try to get it down,
investment.
and exactly, pay attention.
Right.
It's a very easy movie, especially nowadays. You're at home, you got your phone there, like, not paying attention because there's nothing really going on. You're not going to, quote unquote, like, miss a plot element if you, like, go to the bathroom during it or something. Not
Right.
like
You're fine.
leave the room and go to the bathroom. I didn't mean to imply, you know, but you'll be fine. But actually, you won't, because the whole thing hangs together with this
Right.
whole, like, aesthetic and vibe. You need to kind of, like, let it suit, like, wash over you to kind of get it.
Totally. That
Fantastic
last
film.
scene will not mean much if you don't sit with it. Like you have to be
Exactly.
in this place with these people,
Yeah.
and then it's only then it can actually land on you. So,
Hmm.
but at the same time, you can sort of skip away. It's okay. Like
Right. Right.
it
Right.
is that vibe movie. It can be passively consumed a little bit.
Hmm.
And honestly, that's how I watched it in preparation for the podcast. Like I didn't watch every scene, glued to the television. Although I did watch it that way the first time I saw it, I couldn't
Mm,
take my eyes
I
off
know,
of it
me
because
neither.
there's
Yeah.
something about the cinema verite quality of
Yes.
it, why reality TV is such a big deal.
Hmm.
This is probably in the early machinations of that. Like, you can't look away because
Yeah.
you want to know and you want to be in this place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so weird. I mean, I don't want to use the word like boring because it's not a boring movie, but it's like a boring, it's like slow, but a way that you can't, you want to know more. Like you're so
Right,
invested in this. And I remember that too when I first saw it. Interestingly, we had similar like kind of expectations coming into it. Or not expectations, but experiences the first time
right.
watching. But it's like, yeah, I was like riveted to this, even though nothing's really happening, but I'm so
Yeah,
invested. It's
yeah.
it's hard to kind of describe it unless you've seen the film, I guess, that feeling. I guess maybe I'll ask you one question, just like because I saw this movie because I keep hearing about it. It's so great. You got to watch it. So I watched it to kind of be able to talk about it and experience it. Why was this a movie you tracked down or bought on iTunes?
Same thing. I think I would
Okay.
see it on a lot of directors and filmmakers and actors and such, their lists as their favorite movies.
Yeah.
I think Lily Tomlin was a big reason as well,
Mm.
just to
Hmm.
kind of track her filmography. Like, I think this is her first film, I think, or first major
Major
role, if
role.
I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yeah. I think she was in another. She knows she's on TV. Yeah, I'm not as super familiar with her history, but yeah, definitely her star making turn for
Yeah.
sure. Like no
Yeah.
question
So I
about
think
it.
it was those two, I think. And then, yeah, actually, I think Todd Haynes, because as people know, I'm a big
Ah.
fan of
Hmm.
his. And I think he talks a lot about Altman, and there's a Julianne Moore connection between the two. And
Right.
I must
Yes.
have kind of tracked this movie down through that rabbit hole, I
Mm.
think.
Okay.
All right. So what's your number two?
So my number two is Breathless from 1960. This is a film directed by Jean-Luc Godard, starring Jean-Paul Belmondo and Gene Seberg. The IMDb plot summary: a small-time thief steals a car and impulsively murders a motorcycle policeman. Wanted by the authorities, he reunites with a hip American journalist student and attempts to persuade her to run away with him to Italy. So this is a film that I guess maybe to go back to the tree and branch analogy was the movie that got me into French New Wave cinema, which is a movement and a bunch of filmmakers I grew to really like after having this film kind of lit that fuse. Because
Hmm.
a lot of filmmakers that I really loved growing up and still do, Tarantino, Wes Anderson, Scorsese, were very much heavily influenced by this movement
Yep.
out of France. So it was a way for me to kind of go back and see what influenced them. So this was a film that I watched on DVD from Netflix. Was my so I graduated college, and then for about 6 months I didn't find a job. So it was a period of time when I just used and abused the Netflix DVD by mail service, where I upped it to like 5 discs at a time, and I would just sort of pick
Wow.
something I wanted to do and just would like get all the all the films and really like expanded my film knowledge during that time. And this was not the first like French New Wave film that I saw. Like when I was at film school and we saw Contempt and 400 Blows, two
Hmm.
films like I just wasn't ready for, I think at the time. I didn't, and I
Right.
remember not liking either of them when I first saw them. Um, but I kind of did some reading. Okay, what's like the first film to start with? And if you want to get into the French New Wave, because I'm like, you know what? I have all this time. Let me just kind of try this, get into it again, or at least just learn these films because my favorite filmmakers were, always talking about these filmmakers. So I got this one and immediately it just totally blew me away. And I was like, okay, I got to watch all the rest of these French New Wave films. So this film for me, like, I don't know. It's like you watching this, and even still to this day, when I rewatch it for this podcast, because I watch it every couple years too. It's like it feels so fresh and new,
Mhm.
and just like lightning in a bottle thing. That's even now more than 50 years later, just still hits you when you watch it. Just right from the opening, it's they're the main character who's Michel. He's I think the first even line of dialogue is like, "I'm an asshole." He just comes out and says it, and he's got this cool kind of like pose where the hat is sort of like pushed over his eyes. He got the cigarette in his mouth, like it's black and white, like some really cool French guy. And I'm like, whoa, this is like the coolest thing I've ever seen. And then in the first 10 minutes, like they say in the plot summary, he steals a car. And the way that they edit this thing together, like when he's driving down the French countryside, there's these fast cuts. And again, at the time, this is really revolutionary, but it still
Mm-hmm.
felt to me watching this on DVD in like 2004. It felt still just as fresh and new as it must have when it premiered in cinemas. He breaks the fourth wall in that opening like 5 minutes. He talks to the audience and says something like screw you guys, or like he's like dissing the audience. And then there's a sequence when he shoots the police officer, like they say, and they're these very odd like edits and cuts where like it zooms in on the gun, and then you like quickly sort of the police officer's kind of dead. You don't really even know what happened, and then all of a sudden he's like running down this field. Like it's weird. It feels like a student film in a
Mm-hmm.
way, but I think that's only because this whole film to me feels like a filmmaker who like doesn't know. I mean, this is not true, but this is what it felt like watching this film. Like a filmmaker who knows nothing about the art of film, so he doesn't know what the rules are and what he's supposed to do. He just does what he wants to do. Much like this
Mm-hmm.
character in the film, the main character too. Like he just kind of goes around blasé. Okay, I'm just gonna be like doing whatever I want to do, and that freshness and uniqueness comes across in this film to me. And yeah, like maybe too. Like I put Kane on my list last time I talked about it, and to me, like to make an analogy, that film was like inventing how cinema would be made. Like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe to use I don't know if this analogy holds up as I'm thinking about it, but in like a music sense, like that film's like the Beatles. Like they invented and crystallized so much. And then Breathless is like a punk rock band who like just rips
Mm-hmm.
it all down and just pretends like, I've sawed what you guys did before. We're just gonna do something fresh and cool and hip. And it feels like that. Like this movie is like electric. Like I just can't express how this movie makes me feel every time I watch it. It's so just cool. And even all the way down to the very ending of the film, the last shot is like the female character stares like right at the audience and like delivers her line almost like she's asked like a question and she's like delivering it to
Mm-hmm.
you as the audience. And just sort of like you're taken aback by it because you're not used to. It's not like the whole movie they break the fourth wall. There's these two moments when they talk to the audience, or maybe even this one, it's not talking to the audience. I don't know what Godard had in mind, but it just was like, whoa, like they end on such a note like that too. So this film for me, like still feels electric, still feels punk. And it brought me down this whole journey of discovering all these other films that frankly, I like better, like, that's some Truffaut films. I mean, he's now my favorite French New Wave filmmaker. Godard, there's some other films I like of his, but Truffaut, like I just grew to love, but it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't until this film that like electrified that journey for me. And the movie still feels like this today. I mean, it's one of the greatest films. It's awesome. I love this film.
Yeah. First of all, we have to mention that Godard passed away this year. So
Oh yeah, you're right. Okay,
what a
yeah, we
huge
should. Oh
legacy.
my God, yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Honestly, if you had not put this on your list, I would have, because this is my entry into French New Wave as well.
Cool,
I probably
nice.
read the
Okay.
same article, where to start.
Yeah, exactly. It's like what? Yeah,
uh,
where do I start? Right.
right. And then also a Netflix DVD way back when. Yeah, everything you said, like there is just no artifice at all.
Mm-hmm.
But yet it's not a movie that was just like that feels like it's cobbled up and it's
Exactly.
messy, but it's
Mm-hmm.
purposefully messy.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of like mess that's been made out there, which just I've mentioned this before, can be very unsettling in a bad way to
Mm-hmm.
the point that I'm bored.
Right.
You are riveted because it's
Yes.
just so purposeful, but at the same time, it has no rules, and it almost has this feeling of, wait, can you do that? Can you do
Right.
that?
Right.
That's what I remember, and I still felt it watching it again. But the first time I watched it, that's how I felt, and
Mm-hmm.
and then to your point of kind of influencing other directors, like you see that across the movie and all the great people that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
You can sort of, I'm sure somebody has written an article on this of how you can trace the signature styles of all these auteurs that we revere and admire and connect it back to frames in this movie. I'm sure
Oh yeah.
somebody has done that. You
Yeah.
can see it. It's so
Mm-hmm.
amazing, but yet it's so light. That's
Yes.
the
Yes.
genius of it. It's not
Mm-hmm.
pretentious at all.
Mm-hmm.
It just feels like it was just cobbled up together. So yeah, I don't know. This movie is kind of amazing. Great performances as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's a vibe movie, like we were talking about Nashville
Yeah.
as well.
Oh, totally.
But
Yes. Yeah.
I think this is more rooted in character and who these people are while it is also a vibe movie, while it is also an indictment on the audience, and you are kind of part of it all as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
So amazing. What can I
Yeah.
say?
Yeah, no, if anyone hasn't seen this film, I mean, it worked for both of us. So if you're not into French New Wave, try Breathless and, maybe it'll get you just as excited as it did us about that entire, 1960s to early 70s movement with just so many great films. I mean, this film doesn't like
So many.
encapsulate that whole movement, but it, kickstarted the journey for both of us, which is kind of cool that you had the same. Again, we probably stumbled across the same article. We're like, okay, start here.
Probably.
I mean, it's such an academic exercise. At least I treated it as that of like, okay, well, I love this. Like, what else do I get? But it was a fun journey to go down.
Mhm.
And if I hadn't, again, the other two films I watched that from this movement, I was like, I don't know, I was ready for them, I guess, or maybe the film school should have showed this. I don't know, instead of
Yeah.
Contempt. But cool.
Yeah. No, there's still like, I think Belle de Jour was the next
Oh,
one that I watched, which
mm,
also has stayed with me since. But yeah, so many people, Truffaut, Agnes Varda, like it's such a amazing group of people. So
yeah.
yeah, lots more to watch. All right, my number two is Another Year from 2010, directed by Mike Lee, starring Jim Broadbent, Leslie Manville, Ruth Sheen. Quick log line: a look at 4 seasons in the lives of a happily married couple and their relationship with their family and friends. So, while Nashville was very much an environment movie, a vibe movie, a milieu movie, this movie is Another Year is really about people and characters that are just so lived in and so thoroughly realized that you're just with them. And yes, there is plot and story, and you follow that along across the board, but it's almost not even about that. It's really more about the characters and the people and how lived in they are. And like, I don't even remember how I stumbled upon this. It was probably hunting down the actors because Jim Broadman and Leslie Manville are amazing. So I wanted to watch what else have they been in. And I don't think I'd watched. Actually, I had watched Secret and Lies by Mike Lee, which
Mm-hmm.
also blew me away. But I don't think it sort of did the number that this movie did on me, which is to then really go down the rabbit hole of how Mike Lee makes movies, where there is a story idea, there is a structure, but there are all these workshops that he conducts with the actors, where the actors sort of totally immerse themselves and transform into who these people are, and then they themselves are given kind of a archetypal structure of what the scene is, and then they sort of make up their lines for the most part, and then he writes the script as it's happening, and it shows. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just sort of blew me away that you can actually even do that. But yet, like we were talking earlier with even Breathless, it's not potentially super light. It feels so lived in. It's not a play where you feel claustrophobic and you're stuck in spaces. It is cinematic. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many directorial flourishes, but it's all about the performance. And you can see like the backstories of these people written on their faces. You buy every single relationship. And you know this is sort of not to get on my soapbox, but one of the reasons why I love movies, and I think this movie kind of underlined that for me, is that cinema can really make you see people and in turn see yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It can show you lives of people that are different from you, and in that difference you find similarity and you find connections. And I think this movie exemplifies that, and really all of Mike Lee's filmography does that. This just happens to be the one that hit me. So it's just beautiful. It is slow, so you have to be patient with it. Although, like we said again and again on this podcast, the first time I watched it, I couldn't look away because it just felt like something I'd never seen before. Like these didn't look like performances at all. They look like absolutely real people, but again, stylized, not boring, cinematic, and that's just so hard to do. But then the themes of the movie about relationships and friendships and happiness and loss, and the central relationship between Jim Broadman and Ruth Sheen, like what a great couple they are, and the relationship they share, and the impact that has on all these people
Mm-hmm.
around them. But then at the end of it, you sort of question, well, are they even the perfect couple or not? Maybe they aren't. Maybe this is also a bit of an artifice. Like that scene at the end of the dinner table is crushing to me, where these chat
Yeah.
conversations are happening while Leslie Manville and the brother character just they look like tramps sitting on
Yeah.
the table, you
Yeah.
know,
They're like
and
ignoring them, or not ignore, but not, yeah, not engaging with them. And
not engaging with
yeah.
them. They're sort of lost in their own world, as are these
Mm-hmm.
people as well. And
Mm-hmm.
you then sort of question what is even real. Maybe towards like this time watching it, I sort of felt like maybe Leslie and the brother are actually the more real people, perhaps in some way. They're
Mm.
more in
Or
touch
honest
with,
people, you mean, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
more honest people versus maybe the central couple are probably just stuck in their day-to-day, rigmarole,
Mm-hmm.
and it's seemingly happy, but is it really happy? And you can read this, howsoever you want. I'm sure if I watch this movie in a month, I'll probably take away something else. And that's what you get in a Mike Leigh movie, because it's just so lived in and deep that you'll keep discovering new things about humanity and people through it. So I don't know, amazing. I highly recommend this movie, and watch Vera Drake as well, which is, again, Imelda Staunton really gets to shine. She only has one scene in this movie in the
Right. Yeah. She's not
beginning.
really in this. Yeah.
That's Vera Drake is really her movie. So yeah, genius. That's my number two. Another year.
Yeah. My Mike Leigh experience actually, I guess, was similar to you, or my introduction to him then, because you sound Secrets and
Mm-hmm.
Lies was your first Mike Leigh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Me too. This was back. Movie came out in the 90s. I don't remember exactly which year, late 90s. And it was Oscar nominated. So it was back when I was, would see all the Best Picture nominations, or made
Right.
sure to do that. So that's the whole reason I had seen it. Thought it was fine. I remember liking it. I haven't seen it since then. And I actually have not seen any Mike Leigh films other than that one until the Another Year. Just the filmmaker, I don't know, like I never kind of gravitated towards, or yeah, like I don't know, just hadn't seen his stuff yet. So this was my first, or not my second Mike Leigh film, and yeah, it was fine. Like I think everything you said is exactly what he does so well as a filmmaker. I just, for me, it's not my type of
This is
yeah,
not your
not really
style.
my type of film. Yeah. But I think what was interesting was that the central characters, where in the beginning you're thinking like, okay, well, the central characters being the main couple, Jim Broadbent,
Right.
and I don't know the actress's name,
Ruth Sheen.
Rushine, yeah. And you're thinking like, okay, well, maybe it's going to be about these guys, and it is, but it isn't. It's about the people around them. And then I was waiting for like, okay, well, something's got to happen with the main, the main couple, or they seem too good, like they're
Mm-hmm.
too perfect. And then the movie's over, and I'm like, wait, they just nothing like, so are they perfect? And then I started thinking, much like you said, oh, well, maybe they kind of weren't. And then I went back and thinking like the way that they were treating these people who in their lives who were having really miserable lives and horrible things happening to them. A lot of it's self-imposed. It's not like these are innocent people, because no one really is innocent, right? The way that they treated them was a little bit like, I don't know, like they could have been nicer, I guess, even though they seemed very nice. But then it
Mm-hmm.
really started questioning. I started questioning, at least after the movie was over, like, were they good people or not?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Like, and then really no, like you said earlier, like kind of no one really is anyway. But the movie presents them at least, and their performances are like,
Right.
oh, we're the perfect couple. Oh, we're doing everything right. Oh, we love each other. We're so nice that we're letting, these people who've had horrible things happen in their lives. Oh, we're letting them into our house and giving them their time. But are they really treating them with a lot of empathy and honesty? I don't know. The movie's not really saying, and that I thought was definitely super interesting. I mean, Mike Leigh, a lot of his films are, that I can't kitchen sink realism movement in like British
Mm-hmm.
cinema in like the 60s, 70s, 50s, or what have you. Just slice of life kind of, yeah, like much like you were saying, nothing really happens. It's just a simple story of people, but then a lot of things happen in small moments, much like in reality. Yeah, it's not like there's a murder or some political conspiracy. It's just some very small happens, but in these lives of these people, that thing that is, from an external perspective, small, is actually very big in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that is how life is. And I think, you touched on his production style. That is, I think you can tell that gives the authenticity, I think, in the performances
Right.
and in the stories, but more importantly in the characters. Like these people feel so real. Even though, I know Jim Broadbent in tons of different movies, like I know he's an actor, but I literally forget he's an actor in this,
Right.
because he is, I can't remember the character's name, but he is that guy. and you
Um,
believe it. And I think that is a lot to, what you were describing in terms of Mike Leigh's style of how he, his pre-production and crafts the stories. So yeah, I think this is a great example of that, kitchen sink realism. And if this is type of movie that is up folks' alleys, like I think this definitely is one of the better versions of that. Just like for me, it's not a type of filmmaking that is, I particularly, I don't want to say enjoy, but get a lot out of when I watch it. But I'm
yeah,
glad,
this is
it's
not
second,
your
not my thing, not my cup of tea. But yeah, it was nice. It's always nice to watch things. It was, another thing I like about, this podcast. And actually, I will say too, in a way, like a theme of what I was talking about with the branches. Oh yeah, I checked out this movie. It could have opened up an entire exploration into more kitchen sink realism films and Mike Leigh, but it didn't. And maybe it will later on down the road. And
later
this is
on,
what's so great
exactly.
about movies. Like you watch one thing and it could open up this whole, I gotta watch every Godard movie and I gotta look at all these silent films. Or it's like, that was nice, but for now at least that branch will
Right.
remain a little stub, and maybe it'll grow into a giant trunk at some point. But that's what's so great about, that's what I love about movies.
I
You never
couldn't
know
agree
where
more.
that'll lead you.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think for me, and we talked about this before, like I came to movies so much through performance and acting and so discovering this movie and that journey to see
Right.
that you could do this at such a deep level. And this is not even the method, like this is
Oh,
its
right.
own
Exactly.
thing,
Right.
basically. This is not, this is something else totally.
Right.
It's almost like a company of actors putting together a play, but yet do it in a cinematic way that
hmm
feels worthy of the screen. I think that's sort of what really blew me away. And that's why, to me, that's the branch it, I guess, sort of deepened for me. Is like,
Yeah.
okay, you can, this is the depth, these are the depths you can go to through performance and construct this ensemble and this
hmm
milieu through that. And,
Yeah.
and how powerful can that be?
No, totally. Yeah, no, that's a
Yeah,
really good
yeah.
point. Cool.
All right. What is your next?
So my next is my number one. So my
Yeah.
number one on this part two of films that shaped my love of film is Unforgiven from 1992. This movie is directed by Clint Eastwood, starring Clint Eastwood, along with Gene Hackman, Richard Harris, and Morgan Freeman. The plot summary: retired Old West gunslinger William Money reluctantly takes on one last job with the help of his old partner Ned Logan and a young man, the Schofield Kid. So this movie did a couple things for me, and why I put it at number one. First, it showed that, it kind of was part of my journey in terms of loving the Western genre, which is another one of those things I did during that 1 6 month period of unemployment. Rented a lot of those from Netflix DVD. This is basically a pitch for Netflix bringing back the DVD by mail rental, I think. So that was one thing. But more importantly, it really opened my eyes to how movies can be made more deeper by having seen other films, and not in a way where it's like you're watching Jaws and it's the shot from Vertigo that Hitchcock made. Okay, that is like a surface level thing, but in a way like movies can be within dialogue of one another. And if you're a lot of older films, especially in the Western genre, but in other genres too, newer films, you have a deeper appreciation for them having seen other things. So it's not like you have to see it. It's not like coming in at part 5 in Harry Potter series, and if you don't see the first 4, you can't do it. But it adds extra layers to it. So I was someone who did not like Westerns growing up as a kid, thought they were boring. This actually might have even been like the first even Clint Eastwood film I saw appear. Like I wasn't he's one of my favorite actors of all time. I'm obsessed with Clint Eastwood, but I was not always he wasn't like my guy growing up. It wasn't like an Arnold or like a Johnny Depp or something, or Tom Cruise. I just was like, I don't know, Clint Western's boring. I'm not going to watch it. And I saw this film in the 90s, in high school, and I thought it was really good, solid film. But then during this period of time when I decided, I'm going to go back and watch get more into the Western genre, something I kind of written off as a kid. Started with classic Westerns, a lot of the old John Ford films, Stagecoach, Oxbow Incident, Searchers, High Noon. Then where I literally chronologically worked my way up into like modernist Westerns, like The Wild Bunch, and, seen more Leone films, like I talked about Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in the last episode. And then I got into some Clint stuff beyond the Leone films, like Outlaw Josie Wales, Pale Rider. I watched every single one of Clint's Westerns. And then I came back to this movie, and all of a sudden to me, like the post the postmodern tone of this film, where it's like honoring and uh giving an homage to the classic genre of Western, but at the same time criticizing it too, and doing those two things, which I think was new for postmodern Westerns. It just opened my eyes to that. I was like, whoa, like a movie can be better because other movies. Like this is crazy. And I now this is one of my favorite films of all time. And I'll kind of get into a little bit about what I sort of mean. It's like, Clint in this film is an old man. The first time you see him, he's in a pig farm. He's a single father, two young kids, wrestling with pigs in the mud. Just this old guy. That's his introduction in this film. In The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, he comes in. He's like the hero. There's a little shootout moment. You see him from the back of his head. He gets this huge hero shot reveal thing. You're like, this is the god. And in this movie, it's like, wait, this is some guy wrestling around in the mud. And yeah, it works without having known about Clint and the all the films he'd made before that, where he was this amazing hero. But it adds more layers to it if you've seen that character. It's like twist the Clint Eastwood persona. He can't ride a horse. There's a scene he's trying to fire his gun and he can't even shoot. And this is a guy like, again, in all these movies, he can shoot 20 people in 5 seconds. And it's like, and again, you understand the movie puts that into the plot, but it adds more layers if you know this about Clint. And even too, I think, and Clint says this was not at all part of what he was trying to do here, but it is because this character was a gunslinger who murdered all these guys, and he's the baddest gun in the West in Unforgiven, and now he's retired and he's renouncing violence and anti-violence. In a way, I feel like that's almost Clint, and is like in a meta way,
right?
Expressing not an apology, but like an acceptance. Like, yeah, I was playing all these horrible guys who did all this violence on screen and was glorifying it. And now I'm kind of coming to terms with it. Again, Clint denies is what he was doing, but even as an audience member, at least that's sort of what I take away from it. And again, if without really understanding his whole persona and watching all these Dirty Harry films and all these Westerns, it's there, right? But it's even deeper now, having known that about him. And I think, having known the Western genre too, people get killed especially in those classic Westerns, like people die and it's like, okay, cool, or it's not a big deal. And they just kind of get shot and fall off a horse and that's it. And the film moves on. It's about, some other thing. Or when the hero kills the bad guy, it's a very simple kind of black and white thing. Oh, great. The hero's dead, but in this movie, like the violence that's in it is not at all played for heroics, or at least in the first 90% of it. Right. So as part of this film, the reason why Clint and his guys are coming back out and doing this one last job is this prostitute gets cut up and he has to go kill these cowboys that did it. And he's doing it for money, but that's the plot. And when they finally kill those cowboys in the film, it's not like cathartic. You don't feel like this is justice being done. You're off put. The characters are kind of off put by it. It's like twisting your expectations of, okay, I've seen a ton of Westerns. I know how this goes. I'm going to love this as the audience when the bad guys get killed, but you don't feel that. At all. You're like, oh shit, this is like bad. And then Clint also and the other two guys too, they don't feel this is right, but they do it. So it's questioning those things that, again, I think for me at least, were elevated by having gone back and known the tropes of the Western genre a little bit. And then the brilliant thing this film does is turns that whole thing on its head at the very end. When you do get that cathartic moment of Clint coming in and being a really awesome gunslinger guy and kills all these guys at the very end, and then you do actually think that's cool and root for it, but then you question it yourself a little bit. It's like, that's like the moment that if in a normal Western, or the ones that I had seen, that's the whole film is that Clint being cool, right, being a cool dude, killing guys, and you cheer it on. But now, having explored the genre more and seen it again at the end of my, exploration of the Western genre, it hit me a lot harder. And again, like having a dialogue between films was something I never even really thought of, other than, again, homages and visual cribbing and things like that. But now it's opened my eyes to a lot more appreciation for newer movies that come out, and going back and understanding what were the films they're in dialogue with. How is, No Country for Old Men, like how is it talking about the Western genre? What is it trying to say? How is it playing off of what other Westerns have done in the past? And it really opened up my eyes to how film is so it like pays off exponentially. Like the more movies you see, the more they can talk to each other in new and exciting ways. So but yeah, on its own, the movie's awesome too. But that realization came to me upon having done a Western exploration and then seeing this film a second time, and now it's again one of my favorites.
That's amazing. Yeah, I had not watched this movie before, this. Maybe I'd watched a couple of scenes here and there. So
Mm.
this was a new one for me.
Oh, cool.
And I think I mentioned it before to you off mic or on mic as well, perhaps, that I'm not really a Westerns
Hmm.
genre person. I've seen a few kind of modern ones like No Country for Old Men, but I'm not that familiar. And frankly, I've not really seeked it out. But I think this movie, speaking of the branch analogy, it might actually open up a new branch for me because this
Interesting.
movie was incredible.
Hmm.
Even without, I mean, I'm not been living under a rock, so I
Yeah.
know Clint's, mythology and all of it, so I can see some of that. But even without those layers, playing in a deep way like they played for you, this movie is just so incredibly constructed,
Hmm.
technically, but also emotionally.
Hmm.
You're totally swept away with these characters, this town. And then at the end of it, yes, there is that thing of kind of questioning, what was all this for? And is the big cathartic moment even cathartic at all? So there's
Right.
that.
Hmm.
But there's also this thing of kind of like so much of Westerns to me is about the stories we tell each other around campfires, right? Like that's
Hmm.
always the vibe I get. And at some point, you sort of question at the end of the movie, is any of this true?
Right.
Was
Right.
Clint's character, the things that he's known for, the bad things that he's done, which shows up as like text in the beginning of the movie and at the end as well, is any of that even true? Schofield
Hmm.
certainly was not true. He had not
Right.
killed anybody before.
Right.
You question that about Gene Hackman's character as well, like, so what's true in this
Hmm.
world? It's very unclear. And what stories we tell, what gets aggrandized, who gets put up on a pedestal
Hmm.
by society around you, but also yourself, like with Gene Hackman, you know uh putting together his own house, having these rules of no alcohol,
Hmm.
no guns, in a town called Big Whiskey or whatever the name of the town is.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like he, in a way, is trying to, put up this artifice himself to either forgive himself, perhaps, or to just make like a new persona, which is realized by him almost keeping this author captive,
Right. Right.
kind of writing stories for him. So I think the movie is in dialogue with just the general mythology of westerns and storytelling and who we see as heroes and who we don't. But then there are other layers of the price you pay as heroes, and should
Hmm.
you be even looked at a hero as, and of course the Clint meta layer is another layer. So it's just so deep, and then on top of it, like, brilliantly acted, brilliantly made, the score, the
Yeah.
cinematography, the shots, all of it. Like, this is a classic, and it's now made me want to go and seek out westerns. So I might hit you up later to get a bit of a cheat sheet of what should I watch next.
Yeah, no, it's actually a mutual friend of ours. I put together a list and he like went through because
Ah.
I think westerns more than any other genre to me, I'll talk a little more westerns at the end, but like going in order and you see the evolution of the genre, it makes the movies more powerful when you know because
Mm,
they do really play off like modernist westerns are trying to buck the conventions of the classical and the
right.
postmodern they're going back to some of that classical, but they're questioning like should we be bucking, what should we be keeping? And the other reason why I love westerns is on top of that whole layer is really this genre comments about the attitudes of the American culture about America itself. What are they thinking? You know, in the classical westerns in the 30s, there's good guys, there's bad guys. Good guys always win. America's great. You know, why are we don't even think about questioning it because we're always the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
And the modernist westerns like, oh, there's sort of some bad stuff going on here. And those were in the 60s, 70s. That's when America was questioning the evils of the Vietnam War. Why are we doing this? And then
Mm-hmm.
there's Watergate. And then all of a sudden now there's no good guys and bad guys. They're all kind of bad anti-heroes.
Right.
And then you get the 90s where, you know, we want some anti-heroes, but we need some kind of okay, America's doing something good. We just won the Cold War. There are some things in here, so let's salvage a little bit of it, even though we have to be realistic and still say, you know, violence is bad and all the things this film is doing. So like that is why westerns, after getting into them, they're one of my favorite genres now because there's such a way of the filmmakers at the time and the artists and the
Right.
storytellers to comment on about America specifically, like what does America mean? and then they put it in the Old West, and that's how they tell that story. So
Pretty amazing.
it's now one of my favorite genres, one that I never liked until this one period. So yeah, if you are interested, I do have that list that I sent to him, and he went through it, and it's like maybe 8 or 9 films, and it ends with Unforgiven. I feel like Unforgiven is like the final step, but you kind of work through a list to get there. A lot of great films, but yeah, I'm glad you liked it, and it might spark a branch for you.
No, I'm so happy that I watched it. But yeah, and we'll be happy to look at that list as well.
Yeah,
So
yeah, totally. Cool.
all right.
Okay, Karan, why don't we finish it up? What the final movie we have to discuss today? What do we got?
All right. So my number one is Volver from 2006, directed by Pedro Almodovar, starring Penelope Cruz, Carmen Mora, Lola Dionas. Probably butchered that last name. But quick logline: after her death, a mother returns to her hometown in order to fix the situations she couldn't resolve during her life. So just the way I could have easily put Breathless in the French New Wave on my list as well, but
Mm-hmm.
this is also one of the movies that opened that branch of sort of foreign cinema for me. And I probably seeked it out because of Penelope Cruz, and this was her Oscar nomination, very rare for a non-English language actor to be nominated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know if I'd watched any of Pedro's movies before this, probably, but this movie sort of like hit me like a lightning bullet, really. Like we've been talking a lot about at least my movies, which are more about sort of vibe and people and characters. I think this movie is kind of an amalgamation of everything, where there's a ton of plot, there's a ton of story, but at the end of it, it almost doesn't matter because it's really more about the people and the impact they have on each other and the larger themes of society and relationships. So I think it sort of does all of it, but it's done in a way which is far from just a subtle vibe. Pedro is as over the top as anybody can possibly be, with loud colors and over the top actors who are not hamming or overacting, and that's the genius. Like they're all very grounded and rooted, and you understand their emotionality
Mm-hmm.
in every frame, but yet they're a little bit larger than life and over the top in some way. The situations are certainly over the top of what is happening, especially in this movie, really all of his movies. And there's not much, exposition and explanation of why this thing happened and such. You just roll with it. You're on this ride, and you laugh and you cry and you are swept away in it. But at the end of it, I think you're left with just the emotionality of humanity again, which clearly is a big theme for me, and as at least the way I view cinema and the power of cinema. And I think Pedro is kind of a genius in how he's able to capture that and yet make a movie that's super entertaining, is a total riot. So that's why this is on my list. Probably also because Penelope Cruz, I think I'd probably watched something else of hers before this, but this is when I really realized that, oh, this is not just, an attractive actress, who can be very good, but who can sort of bring in such level of depth and emotionality and yet be sexy and sensual and vulnerable and all the things. Like she's, I think, probably one of the most intuitive and instinctive actresses of our time. I think
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you can see like what is happening behind those eyes, and every single reaction just feels so present and in the moment, not fabricated at all, but yet cinema worthy and screen worthy. You can't take your eyes off her. And then the bigger themes of this movie about family and mother-daughter relationships across the board, how kind of communities, especially communities of women, come together and help each other out. I just love all of that. Like how in a very subtle, not on the nose
Right.
way,
Mm-hmm.
when she's trying to put her life back together, get the restaurant together, she's literally walking around and asking her, can you bring the cookies? Can you bring the sausage? Can you
Right.
bring that? Can you just come and help me with this body, by the way, as well? and not ask me any questions.
Yeah.
All of this is happening, which a lot of it doesn't make sense, is completely unrealistic. But what you do get is the power of just community and people helping each other out. And I think that's amazing. We certainly need more of that in the world at all times. So yeah, that is my number one, Volver.
Yeah, this is a film I had not seen before. I had
Hmm.
actually, I'm pretty sure the only Pedro film I had seen was back again in that late 90s. I want to watch all the Academy Award sort of big pictures at the time. So the All About My Mother, though I don't really remember much about it.
Uh-huh.
Clearly, it was one of those things, much like the Mike Lee film that I watched too at the time, like The Secret Life. I was like, okay, yeah, check it off the list, but this didn't like get me excited about the filmmaker. But this was the exact opposite. Like I was floored by this movie. It's so, yeah, like the tone of it is so weird, or it's whimsical. It's like dealing with some of the hardest,
Yeah.
like there's like murder, there's incest, there's like a Chinatown sort of twist in this thing. And these are super, super
Hmm.
dark, awful subjects, but the movie is like whimsical and like magical about it. It's but not like in a way where it's, you know,
Creepy
lessening
or
or right,
unsettling
it's
or
not exactly, it just, I don't, something about this movie, it just really I mean, I thought about it for days afterwards. Yeah, the color, that red color and everything was just fantastic, but you know,
hmm
much like you said, I think Penelope Cruz, I mean, this has got to be one of who, as an actress, I've seen her in a bunch of stuff for, like, I, you know, think she's fine. But now it's like, this has got to be one of the best performances I've seen in a movie in like the last 20, 30 years. Like what she does, this whole movie kind of hinges on her and how she handles these, again, like oddly tonal odd tone of the film of how it's doing it, just amazing. Like though it was funny, like halfway through I'm like, this whole performance, she's kind of like glassy eyed, she's like on the verge of tears at every scene, but again, that sort of
right.
reflects kind of what is kind of going on, and the with her character and just this world and the situation. But yeah, like I was similar, I guess, to what you were just saying about Unforgiven, about like this is gonna potentially spark like a new
Hmm.
thing you want to explore. Like I'm like, okay, like I gotta put, I mean, I know Pedro has a lot of films that goes back, you know, well into the 80s.
Well,
But I want to start exploring more of his stuff and like return to, you know, All by My Mother and really be like, okay, well, this is a guy that like is now resonating with me. In the 90s, it didn't hit it with me.
hmm
But now it's like, okay, I think I'm ready for this because I just, yeah, I thought this movie was great. Like a lot of beautiful moments, a lot of funny moments, a lot of very serious moments. And but you're I also agree with what you said about the female characters in this movie. They're so good. Like the men are all like useless idiots.
jerks.
Just total, like total useless, unhelpful, nothing. It's just a really, really strong set of female characters that Pedro wrote here. It's just it's so, and the hook with the mom about a ghost thing. Like I was all with that. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
this is that kind of movie is okay. Like I'm bought in on this. I believed I believed it the whole time until, you know, the plot kind of goes along there. But yeah, it was I loved it. I'm so glad you had this on the list. You know, at some point maybe I'd you know, check out his stuff or come across something. You never know when a filmmaker is going to kind of hit you at the right time, and this definitely for me it was like the right time for sure. I really enjoyed this.
I'm so glad to hear that. Well, I'll give you my cheat sheet on Pedro because
Okay.
I haven't watched all of his stuff, but I watched a lot because after this movie, I think for me, this was a big pandemic year, 2020
Uh-huh.
exploration. I'd
Ah,
watched this
okay.
movie years before, but then 2020, I checked out a lot of his other stuff that I hadn't
Oh, okay.
seen before, which was amazing. And I love the use of the word magical and whimsical because
Yeah.
that's what it is. And I think it's done in the filmmaking, but I think there's always a plot device. So in this case,
Yes.
it is
Yes.
the ghost
Uh-huh.
that literally brings that feeling of whimsy, and it's kind of becomes like a hijinks thing that, oh,
Yeah.
will other people find her out? Like, you know, she's washing someone's hair and then
Yep.
disappears. And what's gonna happen? She's under the bed.
Right.
And
Right.
I think it's that piece that's injecting that whimsy and magic in these other dark themes, and that sort of is the blend of the tonality. And you're right, like Penelope has to straddle all of that. She
Yeah.
has to live in both of these, all of these different worlds where
Uh-huh.
she's grounded and rooted in the safety of herself and her daughter, but also carrying, you know, this burden of the relationships with her mother and sister and aunt, other things that have sort of haunted her whole life until
Mm-hmm.
the twist happens, and then you
Mm-hmm.
learn more.
Mm-hmm.
And she's, been haunted by that too, which is so much trauma that she's had in her whole life, and that's why she's on the verge of tears,
Yeah. Yeah.
all through the movie.
Yeah.
But yet she's also the straight man,
Right.
because she's
Right.
not the one playing the hijinks thing
Yep.
like the mother is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, only Pedro can do this. It's just so incredible, and in a foreign language,
Right. Right.
which I don't
Foreign to
understand
us.
any Spanish.
Yeah. Foreign
Yeah,
to
to
us.
us
Yeah.
exactly, and yet you're totally with it. I always remember Angelica Houston's intro speech for Penelope when she won her Oscar for uh, Vicky Cristina Barcelona.
Mm-hmm.
And Angelica Houston in the intro says that for the most part of this movie, I'm paraphrasing,
Yeah.
what you're saying literally, we don't really understand, but emotionally, we understand every single thing that you're saying in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that is true about her in this film as well. There've been so many times that I haven't even read the subtitles. You don't have to
Right.
actually,
No, yeah,
because
with her performance.
you're totally with it, because the performance is just so through and through. So yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
no,
very happy you enjoy this
yeah,
movie.
definitely. And even to go back to a theme I was discussing with my number one, Unforgiven, in terms of like films kind of talking to one another. After I saw this, I was like, this is so good. I
Mm,
want to read a bunch about it. I was reading this interview or maybe listening to it or seeing it on YouTube with Pedro, and he was like, yeah, the character Penelope Cruz was like an homage to this archetype from Italian near-realist cinema of this like,
mm,
buxom woman who takes no prisoners, and he wanted
War
to make a
Bride kind of.
yeah, do like a tribute to that. And I was like, oh, well, maybe I got to go back and watch those films too now to like better understand. Because it
Yeah,
was kind of interesting in this film. The camera, I will say, was sexualizing Penelope Cruz a lot. In a way, in some scenes,
yeah,
I'm like, was Pedro? And now, I mean, I know he kind of was. There's some pornographic films in his not actual pornography, but more salacious films, and you can tell he has that eye. It's almost like he's looking at Penelope Cruz's body in some shots, like Quentin Tarantino shoots feet. You know what I mean? I'm like, I can tell you got
right.
a thing here. So then I was like, what's going on here? But then when I read all that stuff about Pedro saying this is what this character was in these Italian films, I'm like, oh, okay. It's like it's opening up another branch now of like checking out this
Right.
archetype. So yeah, this film was exciting to me to watch it in a similar way of like not as the extreme as like Breathless, but I would there's a lot of energy in this film and a lot to do with
A lot
Penelope's
of
performance in
energy.
here. But yeah, I love the film, so thanks for putting it on the list.
Of course. And on the sexualization part, I mean, I'm no expert in this, and I don't even know. I mean, yeah, there's smarter people and other people who can talk about this, more deeply. But to me, at least in this movie, part of it is that he's playing with the audience, and
Mhm.
the tonal shifts that you were talking about. It's almost like it plays in the magical whimsy, of it all, the way she's presented, the way she's dressed, and the way she's shot. But then the other part also, I think her sexuality is also her power
Yes.
in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything that she accomplishes, you have to be able to buy it, that this woman can, you know, take care of her husband's body,
Yes.
take over this restaurant, make it run successfully, be the person that everybody is willing to lend a helping hand. How is all of that happening? Like, I don't think it'll be believable at all if this person didn't have some innate energy and power to her. And I think the sexual depiction to me is coming from that place. Like,
Yes.
of course you will help this person.
Right.
Why wouldn't you? And I feel like if she came to me and said, "Oh, I got this," I would totally trust that. I was like,
Right.
"Yeah, you got this, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I totally believe you."
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what he's trying to do.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Like that's one of her powers in this film, and what makes it believable, the stuff that she goes through. Because like, oh, it's Penelope Cruz.
Right.
Like, of course you give her a pass. It's Penelope Cruz. So,
She can do
um,
anything.
right,
Yeah.
yeah. Cool. So, what were some films that did not make it on this list and might appear if we do a part three next year? So, what do you got?
Yeah. I mean, there were more movies in the similar vein of these movies, and I mentioned a few. So, a bunch of 70s classics like Shampoo and Parallax View and 5EC Pieces and New Leaf, and then pretty much all of Pedro's canon. I would say some other foreign films like French New Wave movies, like you had some on your list, and the ones you mentioned, Handmaid's Tale and Wong Kar-wai's movies. I kind of jumped to that quadrant after I got into this. So I think those are movies that could have possibly been on the list, but might show up in the future. Although I feel like I'll maybe deal with different themes in the future if we did a part 3 of this episode.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, for me, I had like other westerns like The Searchers, just other French New Wave films like Jules and Jim's my favorite one, but it didn't spark the interest. I also had films Third Man, Sunset Boulevard, Clockwork Orange, Beetlejuice, and Lawrence of Arabia. Those are all films that are near and dear to me for various reasons that may show up in a third part if we do
all
it.
Great films. I would also say as like another closing remark that I think after I watched these 3 movies, and maybe I'm saying this in retrospect, that I think I fully started to realize that film, as you said often to me in our friendship, is a director's medium. And I think it's a summation of these movies and just seeing how different Altman, Pedro Almodovar, and Mike Lee are in their process and their treatment and what the final output is, even though all these movies are about humanity. I use that word so much on this podcast, but these movies couldn't be more different in tone and process and what the actors do and how the story and the environment is in dialogue with each other. I think it's sort of really crystallized for me that, this is a director's medium, and that's how I'm going to view this medium now from here on out. So that was the big discovery, I think, of this phase of my movie love.
Oh, interesting. So now you're coming over to the auteur theory side of film.
A little bit.
Okay. Cool. Maybe that can be an episode.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess that was our episode. We're always excited to hear about what are other movies that other people think and hold in high esteem or kind of change the way they looked at films. So please, comment, let us know what those movies might be in all of our socials as well as on iTunes review. As always, we encourage you to leave a rating or subscribe to us because all of that really helps us find new audience members. So thank you for listening. Until next time, bye.